Hello, everyone. We will be continuing with microeconomics. So in this chapter or in this class, we will be discussing about utility. Then we will discuss about market equilibrium, and also we will discuss the concepts of elasticity. So let's get started. So to begin with, we'll start with utility. We are discussing utility here from microeconomic perspective. So at the individual level, as we said, microeconomics is concerned about individuals or individual units. So here utility will be discussed from the perspective of individual units. Now, as a consumer, or every one of us are consumers, as a person who consumes something, we all derive utility from different commodities every day in our lives. Let us take, for example, the class that you are attending right now. This is something that you're consuming knowledge or consuming some basic understanding. So from the class, you get a psychological satisfaction. Maybe, for example, when you attend the class, you feel like you have covered some of the portions of UPSC syllabus. Maybe you get a feeling that you have got some clarity in some of the economic concepts. So these are all psychological satisfaction that you get. So in that sense, utility can be explained as the psychological satisfaction that is derived from consuming a particular commodity. So we can say that utility is the satisfaction that you get after you consume something. Now, as we know, this is something qualitative. What is meant by qualitative? Qualitative means you cannot express in terms of numbers or quantity, but it is something that you feel. It is a satisfaction which you feel psychologically. Okay. Now, an example to quote would be, apart from the class example, would be when you eat your favorite food, you get some level of satisfaction, you get some level of happiness. That it can be converted into some quality or qualitative aspect, which can be called as utility. So we will call it as utils, or every unit of utility is called as utils, even though we cannot actually measure it in terms of numbers. There are two aspects of utility. The first one is marginal utility and the second one is total utility. Now, to understand marginal utility and total utility, let us take an example, a very simple illustration. Suppose you are walking from your house or your hostel or PG or wherever you stay. From your stay, you are walking to your place of work or your place of study, your reading room, your institute, or maybe the place where you work. So you start from here and you travel till here. Maybe you walked about 1 kilometer and it was a sunny day. When you reach here, you feel very thirsty, you feel very tired. So there was a shop nearby. You consumed 1 glass of juice, maybe lime juice. So 1 glass of lime juice gave you a lot of utility in the sense that you were very tired, you were very thirsty. So we can take that as maybe 100 units just for the sake of example. So let's take it as the first glass of lime juice that you consumed gave you 100 units of utility. You wanted one more glass. The second glass of lime juice gave you 70 units. Why we take a lesser number is because if you think from the perspective of a consumer, you can easily imagine that when you drink the second unit, or maybe when you consume any commodity, the second unit of any commodity, the satisfaction would be lesser. Just imagine yourself in this place where we are discussing about an example where a person walked from house to office or to reading room. So imagine yourself in that position. You drink 1 glass of juice, which gives you a lot of satisfaction, but the second unit definitely will not give you so much of satisfaction. It would be much lesser. The third glass, which gave you maybe 10 units or 20 units of utility, when you drink the fourth glass of juice, it gave you no utility, or there was no point in drinking that. It gave you no satisfaction. Let us take it as 0 units. And somehow you also drank a fifth glass, which gave you a negative utility. Maybe, for example, you felt like you should not have drank it. Maybe you felt that uh, there was some awkward feeling. So let us take it as minus 30 utility or units. So from this illustration, we can conclude a lot of things. We can actually conclude a lot of concepts related to utility. The first thing is, what is a marginal utility? Now, marginal utility means the additional satisfaction that you derive from consuming every additional unit of a commodity. That is, from the first glass to the second glass. That is, when you consumed an additional unit, what was the extra satisfaction that you got? That is what we call as marginal utility. Now coming to the concept of total utility. What is a total utility? Total utility is the addition or the sum total. We can say that it is the sum total of all units of utility that you have got. That is 100 plus 70 plus 20 plus 0 plus minus 30. So altogether, here in this example, we have consumed 5 units of lime juice or 5 glasses of lime juice. So the total utility that you have derived from consuming all the units together is what we call as total utility. So we learned two concepts. One is marginal utility. The second one is total utility. Now, the third point is that utility can sometimes be zero also. That is, when you consume a commodity, it is not necessary that you should get a psychological satisfaction. It can be nil or it can be zero. There are cases where the psychological satisfaction is zero, or there shouldn't be a satisfaction at all. And the fourth thing is, this is the third point, and the fourth thing is that utility can sometimes be negative. That is, maybe for example, you ordered a plate of biryani, which you really love. You ate the entire plate of biryani and you are craving for some more. You ate another plate. There are situations when you eat a lot, and which finally makes your tummy really upset, and you won't even enjoy the taste or the satisfaction of the first unit itself. Such a situation can lead to negative utility also. So we are trying to say that utility can be positive as well as negative. So the fourth point I want to explain is that utility can even be negative. So 4 points. One is marginal utility, second one total utility, third one zero utility, and the fourth one negative utility. Now the most important concept in utility is the law of diminishing marginal utility. Okay, so what is this law of diminishing marginal utility? Let us take the previous example. See, in this previous example, we saw that when the person or when you consumed the first unit, you got 100 units of utility. Second one, 70. Third one, it reduced to 20. In the fourth unit, it reduced to 0. And in the fifth one, it came down to minus 30. So what we are trying to say is, as you consume every additional unit of a commodity, the utility or the psychological satisfaction that you tend to derive reduces compared to the previous one. That is, to give you a very simple example. For example, you went for shopping, you really, really loved a dress. It can be a shirt in case of boys, and maybe it can be a salwar suit in case of girls. Let it be anything. You really like the cloth, or you really like the particular garment, you bought it. And the first time you wear it, you are so excited, right? You feel like you have got something that you really wanted to, and you feel like, you feel yourself very handsome or beautiful. But the second time, the third time, and the fourth time you wear it, you lose your excitement. It's universally applicable in everything. Maybe you get your first salary. You got your first job, you got your first month salary, and maybe you buy commodities, maybe you buy gifts for your family, for your friends, because you're super excited, because you are very happy. But it's not the same when you get the second one, third one, and etc. etc. That is a human psychology. The level of satisfaction tends to reduce as you consume every additional unit of a commodity. You can put yourself in any situation, you can put yourself in any example and see if you have experienced the same. I'm sure you will feel the same, because this universally happens with everyone. The utility that you derive from consuming every additional unit tends to reduce. So this is what we call as law of diminishing marginal utility. I hope it's clear for you. It is nothing. It's a very simple concept which explains that as you consume every additional unit of an commodity, of a particular thing, that satisfaction that you derive from it reduces. So that is what we call as law of diminishing marginal utility. I hope it's clear for you. So this is the law of diminishing marginal utility. So with this small example, with this small illustration, we have completed almost all the concepts related to utility. Let's see what it is. Let's revise it one more time. So what is utility? It is the satisfaction. As we said, it is the psychological satisfaction that you derive from consuming a particular commodity. Like, for example, when you eat your favorite food, the satisfaction that you get is your utility. Now, we discussed what is marginal utility. We also discussed what is total utility. What is marginal utility? It is the additional satisfaction or the satisfaction derived from consumption of additional unit of a commodity. Then what is total utility? It is the total satisfaction derived from the consumption of given units of a commodity. Law of diminishing marginal utility. When one consumes more and more units of a commodity, the satisfaction would reduce. So this is law of diminishing marginal utility. I hope the concept of utility is clear for you. Now we are moving to a very important concept, that is market equilibrium. Before we move into market equilibrium, I also want you to get a understanding of how we can use the concept of utility in macroeconomics or maybe in government schemes. Okay, with that clarity, we will move on to market equilibrium. Let us take a very small example. Now, you must have read in the newspapers or you must have heard it in the news that in the previous budget, the amount of money or the fund allocated for MGNRGA, which is a very popular scheme, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. So the scheme MGNRGA, the fund allocated was reduced. Okay, keep that current affair aside, but let's come to the technical aspect of it. Let us take, for example, this is just an example. These are not real numbers. I'm just giving you some numbers to make it clear for you. Don't take it or consider it as real numbers. Let us consider, for example, in the year 2015, the government allocated 1,000 crore rupees for MGNRGA. This is just an example. And in the year 2020, or let us take the next year itself, that is 2016, the government again allocated the same 1,000 crore rupees. What happens here? In the year 2015, 1,000 crore was allocated. In the year 2016, another 1,000 crore was allocated. Here you see that there is no increase in the amount or the funds allocated for MGNRGA. The amount is remaining same. Now, if you apply the rule or the law of diminishing marginal utility into this example, you understand that the people who were the beneficiaries of the scheme in 2015, the same beneficiaries in 2016, they are also getting the same amount of money, or there is no increase in the funds allocated. So what is the impression or what would be the psychological change or psychological impression that would be created in the minds of the beneficiaries? That here we can apply the law of diminishing marginal utility. That is, their satisfaction will tend to reduce because they are consuming the same commodity or they are getting the same benefit as in the previous year. Okay, so automatically people will lose the excitement or lose the satisfaction from the scheme. This is applicable to every single scheme introduced by the government. When a new scheme is introduced, everyone is very excited. If you imagine yourself in the situation, you also talk a lot about the new scheme. You get excited, and we as human beings have a feeling that government has done something for us. The budget has allocated something. The budget has brought in some new schemes, which gives us a lot of satisfaction and a lot of, excitement. But it will not be the same next year if the government is doing the same, or if the government is reintroducing the scheme with the same properties or the same features and the same amount of funds. This may not be the same. All right. So what would the government do? You think from the government's perspective. As a political party running the government, the political party behind the government, they would want people to vote for the political party in the upcoming election as well. They would want to impress people. They would want people to vote for them again. So as the election year approaches, what would the government do in a budget? The government will try to, improve the psychological satisfaction of the people, which would further turn down into votes. Okay. So what would the government do? Let's take, for example, in the year 2020, there is a upcoming election. Just imagine So what would the government do? The government would want people to be really happy. The government would want to impress people, create a psychological happiness among the people, so that this psychological satisfaction, or what we call as the utility, turn into votes. For that, from 1000 crore, the government would increase the amount, and let's take it as 2000 crore. So what is the impact here? One is the utility would increase. As the utility would increase, the number of votes would increase. But what is the negative side of it? The government would be spending a lot of money on it. So as the government would spend a lot of money, this will create a fiscal burden for the government. Burden for the government, which we call as fiscal deficit. Or we can say burden of funds. Okay. So the positive side for the government would be that they would be able to improve the psychological satisfaction and increase the number of votes. But at the same time, this creates a fiscal deficit. This is how we will study every concept. And this is how every concept is applicable at the macroeconomic level. As I said in the first class, even though we are dealing with some of the microeconomic concepts here, they are all applicable at the macroeconomic level, where we would be studying about different government schemes, how the government is spending money, how inflation is affecting our economy. So in all these, this would be very much helpful. So with this example, I hope how utility and law of diminishing utility, marginal utility is important from our examination perspective. So with this, we are moving on to the next concept. That is the concept of market equilibrium. Let me explain it first. The concept of market equilibrium. Okay. Now, first let me explain what is the concept of equilibrium. Equilibrium, the term itself gives you an idea about something related to equality or something related to equalization. That is the first impression you get when you hear this word or the term equilibrium. So you're not wrong. It is something related to equalizing or equality. It is nothing but a equilibrium in the market or a equal maintenance of two factors of the market. So when we hear the term market, what are the two factors that comes to our mind, or what are the two elements that combine together to make a market? It is nothing but the demand and the supply. So demand and supply together, we call it as market. Now, market equilibrium is a situation where the aggregate demand in the market, it is a situation where the aggregate demand, that is the overall demand in the market, is equal to aggregate supply in the market. That is, it is a situation where the overall demand in the market is equal to the overall supply in the market. This situation is called as market equilibrium. Now let me explain why is market equilibrium considered as an ideal market situation. You need to understand why is market equilibrium an ideal market situation. Okay. To understand this, let us take the other two cases. So what did I say about market equilibrium? I said that it is a situation where the aggregate demand in the market is equal to aggregate supply. Now, what would be the other two situations? They are, one is where aggregate demand would be higher than aggregate supply. Another one is where the aggregate supply would be higher than aggregate demand. These are the two situations apart from equilibrium situation. So let us take the first one, that is where the aggregate demand is higher than aggregate supply. Automatically, when the aggregate demand in the market is higher than aggregate supply, what would happen to the prices? Prices would go up. Imagine yourself as a seller. Suppose that you have 100 units to sell, whereas the demand is 150 units. And as a seller, you know that the commodity that you are selling has a huge demand in the market. That is, You have just 100 units to sell, whereas the market in total or the aggregate market demand is 150. The market as an aggregate is demanding 150 units from you. So you know there is an excess of demand, and as a seller, you would increase the prices of your commodity. So as a result, the prices would go up. And as the prices go up, who would benefit from it? It is the seller who would be gaining from it, and it is the consumer or the buyer who would be losing from it. That is, in a situation where the aggregate demand is higher than aggregate supply, the prices would go up. And in such a situation, it is the buyer who would lose because the buyer ultimately will have to pay more prices, and it is the seller who would be gaining. Why? Because the seller will get higher prices for their produce. So this situation is favorable for the seller and unfavorable for the buyer. Now let's take the second situation, that is where aggregate supply is higher than aggregate demand. Let us take, for example, the aggregate supply is 100 units, whereas the demand is only 50 units, which means, again, imagine yourself as a seller. You have 100 units of a commodity to sell, but the market in total is demanding only 50 units from you, which means another 50 units is left out with you as a stock, which means it's not getting sold out. So what will you do? You want to clear your stock. You are a seller and you do not have the capacity to keep the extra stock with you for a long time, especially when it comes to perishables like agricultural commodities or any commodity which doesn't have a long shelf life. Okay, in such situations, you have an excess of 50 units. So what will you do with this 50 units? You would be selling them at a lower price or discounted price so that the buyers would buy it from you. That's how the sale, discounts and all that happens. Okay, so in this case, the prices would go down because the seller wants to sell everything. So as the prices go down, who would gain? The consumers or the buyers would gain because they are getting the commodities at a lower price. But what about the sellers? The sellers would lose because they are losing their price, or they are forced to sell it at a lower price. So in these two situations, if you see, there are two important stakeholders, and these two important stakeholders are consistently the two important stakeholders in any market situation. That is the buyer and the seller. These are the two important stakeholders if you take any market situation. Now, in the first and the second case, you can clearly see that either the buyer or the seller are losing. That is, only one stakeholder is gaining from such a situation. It can be either the buyer, if it's the case of a low market price, and if it's the case of a high market price, it is the seller alone. Both of the stakeholders does not equally gain from market situation. But let us come to equilibrium. That is where the aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. Let's take, for example, demand is 100 units, supply is 100 units. So what does it ideally mean? The market is producing or selling only as much as what is demanded by the market. In such situations, the prices would be normal. We are not saying the prices are high or low. It would be stable. It would be normal. And in this situation, no stakeholder, that is either the buyer or the seller, no stakeholder is gaining or gaining excessively from the market situation. Both of them are equally advantageous, and it is not disadvantageous for anyone. And that's why market equilibrium is considered as an ideal market situation. I hope it's clear for you. Okay, with that understanding, let us come to market equilibrium. Market equilibrium, it refers to a situation in which the aggregate demand and the aggregate supply of a commodity or the market are equal. That is AD equal to AS. That is aggregate demand equals to aggregate supply. It represents an ideal market condition. We have explained already that why it is an ideal market condition. During equilibrium, price and quantity becomes stable. It is the stage of no change. And the stable price is called as equilibrium price, and the quantity is called as equilibrium quantity. And we have already explained why it is an ideal market situation. The same explanation is given here. I'll just read it out for you. Because it is a situation where the firms or producers do not make excess profit and does not undergo loss. Similarly, for consumers also, they do not maximize utility or get exploited. Both producers or consumers will benefit from equilibrium. We have seen the other cases as well. Now, who decides equilibrium, or how is equilibrium determined in a market? So, how is equilibrium defined in a market can be explained with the help of market mechanism to maintain equilibrium. So now we will see what is this market mechanism that helps in maintaining equilibrium. Okay, before we go into the explanation, I want to illustrate this mechanism, or what we call as the market mechanism. Okay. As we said, equilibrium is aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply, or we can say it is a market situation where the aggregate demand in the market is equal to the aggregate supply in the market. So this is what we call as equilibrium. Now, let us try to draw equilibrium on a graph. Okay, let us take price and quantity. Okay, these graphs are not at all important for your examination. I'm explaining it with the help of a graph to make it more clear. This would give you more conceptual clarity. That is the only purpose. Okay. So price and quantity. We have price and quantity. This is our demand curve, DD or DC, demand curve. I have named it here DD. And this is a supply curve, SS. Okay. And according to the definition of equilibrium, it is a market situation where aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. So can we say that in this graph, equilibrium is the point where the aggregate demand meets the aggregate supply? Or in other words, can we also say that it is a point where the demand curve meets the supply curve? Yes. So this point where the demand curve meets the supply curve is the point of equilibrium here. We can name it as E, equilibrium or E. Now we have seen earlier that the price, the stable price at equilibrium is equilibrium price and the quantity is equilibrium quantity. So let us name it as P and Q. Equilibrium price is named as P and equilibrium quantity is named as P and Q. Okay. Now, this is the graphical representation of market equilibrium. Simply draw a graph, plot the demand curve and the supply curve. The point where the demand curve and the supply curve meets is the point of equilibrium. That is the point where the aggregate demand would be equal to the aggregate supply. Okay, so this point is the equilibrium point. Now, we need to understand the market mechanism that maintains equilibrium. This is very important. Pay your full attention so that the concepts gets more clear for you. Now see, let's take a situation. The other two situations apart from equilibrium. Let us take the first situation where the price is higher. So here in the first situation, we are assuming that the price has gone higher. See, the situation, the first one, that is aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply. See this, aggregate demand is higher than aggregate supply. What has happened here? As a result, the price has increased. So price has increased from the equilibrium price. We are assuming that the price has increased from the equilibrium price. So we will take this as our first situation. Okay. Okay. So the first situation, price has increased. Price increased from P to P1. Let us assume price has increased from P to P1. So this is the new price. So we draw the price line so that it touches both the demand curve and the supply curve. Why do we draw the price line straight like that or touching both demand curve and supply curve? This price line or P1, this price line means that this at this point, that is the point where it touches the demand curve, denotes that at price P1, this much is the demand created in the market. And here at price P1, when it touches the supply curve, it means that this is the quantity of supply at price P1. I hope it's clear. So the straight line denotes the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied at price P1 in the market. Now you see this point and this point. What does it denote? The first one denotes Q1, that is QD1. We can say that it is the quantity demanded of a commodity at price P1. And QS1, this point QS1 denotes the quantity supplied at the price P1. I'll make it clear one more time. We have assumed that the price has increased from P to P1. So at P1, there is a new price, which is not the equilibrium price, which is a higher price or price higher than equilibrium. At P1, we draw a straight line so that we get the 2 points. That is the 2 points touching demand curve and the supply curve. So QD1 is the point where the price touches demand curve, denoting that at price P1, this much is the quantity demanded. So this is the quantity demanded. And the second point, that is QS1, that is a point where the price line touches the supply curve, denoting that at point P1 or at price P1, this is a quantity of supply. Now, if you see here, from the previous equilibrium quantity Q, the demand has reduced and the supply has increased. All right. So we can write that price has increased. So what has happened as a result? This is a simple, law of demand and law of supply. When price increases, quantity demanded decreases. And when price increases, quantity supplied increases. We have discussed this in the previous class. Okay. I have just explained the simple concept of demand curve and supply curve through this graph. Don't take it complicated. I'll explain to you at the end why I have drawn this graph, because the graph would help you better understand the concept of market equilibrium. Okay, we have just denoted this law of supply and law of demand in this graph. All right. So quantity demanded decreased and quantity supplied increased when the price has increased. Now, see. This is what happened in case of P1. Now, when the quantity demanded decreases, when the price increased, the quantity demanded decreased and the supply increased. So as a result of these two, what would ultimately happen? There would be stock. Why? Because the producers are supplying more, or the producers are producing more. At the same time, the consumers are demanding only less. So this will lead to accumulation of stock. So this stock accumulation can be denoted by this triangle. So this triangle denotes excess of commodities supplied in the market. Okay. So this triangle denotes excess stock created in the market. Okay. As a result of this excess stock, what would the sellers do? The sellers are incurring excess stock accumulation, which means the sellers are not able to sell everything out. So what will the sellers do? They will sell their commodities at a discounted price. So the price will come back to, again, normalcy or equilibrium. This is how the market functions. So when there is a stock accumulation, the sellers are willing to sell it at a lower price, which will lead to reduction in prices coming back to equilibrium. Now let's take the second case, that is a decrease in the prices. Decrease in the prices. We know that when there is a decrease in the prices, quantity demanded would increase and quantity supplied would decrease. This is what normally happens. Okay. So when there is a decrease in the prices, quantity demanded increases and quantity supplied reduces. Let us take here as P2. So what is P2? Reduce prices, or a reduction in the price level is denoted by P2. Draw a straight line connecting or touching both demand curve and supply curve. These are the 2 points. So here you will see that, the demand has increased and here the supply has reduced from the initial equilibrium quantity. That's what we have written here. When the price decreases, quantity demanded increases and quantity supplied reduces. Okay. So as a result, there is more demand creation in the market, but the supply is less. So what will the sellers do? We have seen that when the demand is high and when the supply is low, the prices will further increase. So from P2, the price will again go back to normalcy. Why? Because this triangle actually represents increase in demand, or we can say excess of demand. Excess of demand. Okay. So this is how in a market equilibrium is maintained. So in a market equilibrium is maintained through this market mechanism. The market itself will maintain equilibrium. Okay. By adjusting demand and supply. So this is what we call as market equilibrium. This is also called as invisible hand. The name invisible hand was given by Adam Smith. Why the name invisible hand was given? It's because the market mechanisms of demand and supply, they interplay with each other and it's not visible for anyone. It is an imaginary thing. So that's why it is called as invisible hand. So remember this word also, or this term also, invisible hand. All right. So invisible hand. Okay. Now, I hope it's clear for you. For those who haven't understood this concept of equilibrium, let us try to explain this without the help of a graph. Okay, let's see what helps you. Okay, let us explain it without a graph. So, what is equilibrium? It is where aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. It's a market situation where the aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. Now, we are taking the first case, that is where aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. Everything is good. Both the consumer and the producer is equally benefiting from the situation. The situation has changed to increase in prices. That is, the prices has increased. As a result, what would happen? Quantity demanded decreases and quantity supplied increases. Okay, this is law of demand and law of supply. So as a result of this, what would happen? Demand is less, supply is high, which will lead to stock accumulation. Stock accumulation. As a result of stock accumulation, the sellers are forced to reduce their prices. So what will the sellers do? They will reduce their prices in order to sell off their excess stock. So as a result, the stock will get completely sold out. The prices would go down, which means the prices would come back to equilibrium. Okay, this is the first case. Second case is the prices going down. When the prices go down, according to law of demand, quantity demanded increases, and according to law of supply, quantity supplied decreases. Okay, we have already discussed law of demand and law of supply in the previous video, previous class. So please do revise your classes every day so that the upcoming topics would be easier for you. And without revision, economics would be difficult. And that is one reason why many of the students say that economics is a difficult subject. They don't really revise. In economics, what I understood as of now with my experience is that only conceptual clarity can fetch you marks. You cannot by heart the subject. You cannot by heart anything here. If you know the concept, you get it. If you don't know, you don't get anything. That's how we play with economics in the exam. So conceptual clarity is very important, and I'm trying to help you build that conceptual clarity. And for that, I need your help also. I will need your, cooperation also. From your end, what you have to do is only to revise everything that is taught in the class, plus revise the handout that is given to you. Everything else will take care of it by itself. The conceptual clarity, the building of concepts, everything will happen automatically because we are doing intense revision of previous year question papers. The last 10 years, we'll do it intensively. We will revise the concepts. We will discuss the questions. We will do everything in the class. The only thing that you need to do is revise your classes properly. All right, coming back. So as we said, when the prices decreases, the quantity demanded increases and the quantity supplied reduces. As a result of this, demand is high and the supply is less. So what will the sellers do? They will increase the price. So again, when the prices increases, it will go back to equilibrium. this interplay or this market mechanism will continue in the market always. But it doesn't mean that there is always equilibrium in the market. If there was always equilibrium, then there wouldn't have been inflation, there wouldn't have been deflation. Such situations would not have been happening in the market. But I'm trying to say that the market will always try to maintain equilibrium. All right. So this is called as invisible hand or market mechanism to maintain equilibrium. Let's understand a very small illustration to make it clear. As we move forward in the following modules, especially inflation, external sector, in all these modules, you will thoroughly understand how this equilibrium plays a very important role. Like for example, in case of inflation, how are the prices stabilized during inflation? Then when it comes to external sector, how is the uh, value of rupee and dollar or the external value of rupee determined? How is exchange rate determined? All these concepts are related to market equilibrium. Again, when it comes to stock markets, how is the prices of stock market or prices of stocks determined? All these are based on the simple concept of equilibrium. There is a huge lot of practical applications for this concept equilibrium. We are trying to crack it in a simple way. So be with me. But here, to make it more clear, I'll just give you a very small illustration. Let's try to break it. Okay, so here, let us take two banks. Okay, let us take two banks. Let us take, for example, one is ICICI Bank, another one is SBI. So we are taking two banks and we are taking the savings interest rate or deposits. We can say deposits or savings and interest on loans. Okay. So the first bank, that is the ICICI Bank, offers a 10% of interest on savings. Whereas the second one, SBI, only provides 8% of interest on savings. Okay. Now, we all know that a bank or the banking business works on the concept of spread. What is this spread? Spread means the difference between interest on loans and interest on deposits. Let us take, for example, a bank charges 15% interest on loans and provides 12% of interest on deposits. What is the spread of the bank? It is 3%. And it is from the spread that the bank gets its profit. We don't say that the entire spread is bank's profit because bank will have a lot of administrative expenses and other running expenses. But a part of the spread becomes profit of the bank. So what I was trying to conclude is, as the spread of the bank increases, the profit margin of the bank also would increase. And if a bank has to get the spread, the interest of loans should be higher than that of interest on savings. That's a very simple logic. The interest that the bank charged from loans would definitely be higher than what the bank would be giving as interest on deposits. Okay. So in this example, ICICI is giving 10% on savings, which means that ICICI would be charging more than 10% from the loans. Let us take it as 12%. SBI, which is charging 8% on savings, 8% on savings, charges 10% on their loans. Savings, they are providing 8% and charging 10% on loans. Now, both of the bank gets equally a 2% spread. Now, from whatever we have studied till now, put all your conceptual clarity into this illustration. The concepts of demand, supply, law of demand, law of supply, utility, market equilibrium, whatever concepts you have studied, put everything together and try to understand or try to conclude in which bank would there be more demand for savings. It's a very simple logic. Which bank would have more demand for savings? Definitely it is ICICI. Why ICICI will have more demand for savings? Because compared to SBI, ICICI is giving more interest rate. But can you also tell me which bank would face a more demand for loans or which bank would incur higher demand for loans? It would be SBI. Why? Because compared to ICICI, SBI charges less interest rate. All right. So consumers or customers would want to buy loans from SBI and would want to deposit with ICICI. I hope it's clear for you. But what's the problem here? The problem is that the customers wants to deposit at ICICI and assume that the deposits at ICICI are very high because they are giving a higher interest rate. But nobody is demanding loans from ICICI. So what will ICICI do with these deposits? Unless they are able to transform these deposits into loans, they will not get what we call as a spread. So what will they do? What will they do? They have nothing to do. So this is similar to what we have explained here. That is, it will lead to an excess stock creation. Okay. So this will lead to an excess of stock creation of deposits in ICICI. So this will lead to an excess of stock creation with ICICI. So come back here. Because of the excess of stock creation, what will we do, or what will ICICI do? The same thing. When there is a stock creation, they will reduce the price. So whenever the sellers are facing a stock creation or an outstanding stock, they will reduce the price, which means that here in the case of ICICI, they will reduce the price or the rate of interest on loans because there is an excess stock of savings there. So they want to sell it out. So what will they do? They will reduce the interest rate on loans. So if they have to reduce the interest rate on loans, what will they do? Suppose they have reduced the interest rate to 10%. So what will they do? They cannot accept deposits at 10% and give away the loans at 10%. Then they will have no spread. So what will they do? Simultaneously, they will also reduce the interest rate on deposits or savings. Okay. So this is what will happen here. So they will reduce the interest rate on loans. At the same time, they will also reduce the interest rate on savings. Let us assume that they have reduced the interest rate to 10% here and 8% here. Now come to SBI. SBI is facing the problem of excess demand for loans. So here what is the problem? Supply is less and demand is high. So what will happen? Price will be increased. So what will they do? They will try to increase the price here. Okay. To maybe 11%. So accordingly, they will increase the deposits interest also to 9%. Again, let's in the previous example, let us take it as, to make it more clear, let us take it as they have reduced, ICICI have reduced the interest rate on loans to 11%, and here reduce the savings deposits interest to 9%. So here, see equilibrium. Both ICICI and SBI, same 9% for deposits, and loans, same 11%. So this is how market mechanism works. Okay. And this is the reason why you see that if you take the interest rate and the deposit rates of many of the banks, almost all the banks have the same interest rate, maybe 0.25 to 0.5% difference. Why is this so? This is because there is the property of market equilibrium being applied every day in the market, in the banking business. And this is why equilibrium creates an equal environment for everyone, a competitive environment for every player. And see, from this example, we can make some conclusions as well. The first conclusion here would be that there were two banks in this example. And this is just an example to illustrate the concept. So here we have assumed that there are competitors for a bank, which means that equilibrium plays well in a competitive market environment, or we can say that equilibrium works well in a perfectly competitive market. Later, we will discuss what is a perfectly competitive market. So, what kind of market is apt for market equilibrium? That is perfectly competitive market. So, it works well in a perfectly competitive market. I hope it's clear. Okay. We will be learning about equilibrium, its practical application, how equilibrium helps in determining various interest rates, various exchange rates. All this we will discuss as we move forward with the upcoming lectures, upcoming modules. But here I wanted to give you a simple illustration to explain the practical application of equilibrium. I hope it's clear for you. So I think we will wind up for today. wind up with this video and take up the next concept in the next video. Thank you so much.